Hi BC, it's Rob here with another video, and I think it was last Wednesday I was watching a video by Chris at the Long Cut, and he was showing 10 records, maybe 11, that he always reached for. So they might not be his favourite albums of all time, but you know, most of us have got a decent sized record collection. Sometimes you're not too sure what to pick out. And these were the sort of 10 records that he could always rely on, and they never let him down. So after watching that video, Norman Maslov did a response. And since then, I've seen a number of people doing video responses. Some people have done it a little bit differently, sort of the 10 records that they played the most in their life. But I wanted to do it sort of the 10 records over the last couple of years that I've always reached for. So there's some pretty new stuff in here and some classics. So the first album I want to show is from 1979. It's Drums and Wires by XTC. So this is the XTC album that I reached for. 3 or 4 XTC albums I'm very, very fond of, depending what mood I'm in. But this tends to be the one that I reach for. I remember buying it pretty soon after it was released. Making Plans for Nigel, lead off single. But there's plenty of really good tracks on here. Complicated Game, 10 Feet Tall, Helicopter, to name a few. And this is an album that certainly never lets me down. XTC from 1979 and Drums and Wires. Similar sort of time period, 1980. So 79, 80 are sort of my favourite years for music. So albums from that period hold a lot of sort of sentimentality for me. And this album's no exception. It's Zenyatta Mandata by The Police. This is the Police album that I sort of reach for. If you ask, I mean, I regularly ask 5 people, what's your favourite Police album? And they can all give me a different answer. And it's been tricky over the years for me to sort of decide which is my favourite. But at the moment, the last couple of years, this has been the one that I've reached for. Don't Stand So Close to Me. Among the great tracks on here. I've always loved When the World is Running Down. You Make the Best of What's Still Around. Driven to Tears, Man in a Suitcase. Just think it's whatever mood I'm in, I put this on and I always cheer up. So I need to play it more often. The Police and Zenyatta Mandata. So this is a more recent album. Feels very recent, but it's actually 13 years ago. Plastic Beach by the Gorillaz. So as on all the Gorillaz albums, there's a lot of guest vocalists on here, and there's some really, really good vocalists on here. And there's also Lou Reed. We've got Marky Smith on here, Bobby Womack, De La Soul, Griff Rhys from the Super Furry Animals. I'm always, when I buy a Gorillaz album, I'm always hoping, I always buy their albums and I'm always hoping they're going to be as good as this album. And they always just sort of fall short. Stylo, Superfast Jellyfish, Welcome to the World of Plastic Beach, On Melancholy Hill. Just 4 of the great tracks on this album. And this is certainly an album over the last couple of years that I reached for. Gorillaz and Plastic Beach. This is an album that pretty new to me, even though it's from 1971. It's David Crosby, If I Could Only Remember My Name. So I did a ranking of albums from 1971, my favourites, and this came second. That's how much I really love this album. And like I say, it's pretty new to me. I think it's Cowboy Movie and Laughing are the 2 standout tracks for me on this album. But I play it a lot, sort of familiarising myself with it. And for me, it's a bit of a classic, and I do reach for it regularly. If I Could Only Remember My Name by David Crosby. Here's a band, the debut album, eponymously named Parcels, and the Parcels album from, I think it's from maybe 2018, this one. So the Parcels are from New South Wales in Australia. I think they're a 6-piece, if I'm counting right. So this is kind of daytime disco, very much influenced by Daft Punk. They went over to Berlin and Daft Punk produced this album. I can remember I went to Sheffield and went record shopping with my son, and he bought this album. And I liked the jacket and I was intrigued by it. So when I went home, I streamed it. I think within a week I bought it. And it's a real delight. They've only released 2 studio albums. They've actually released a live album as well. But if you don't know the Parcels, well worth checking out. Love this album. So yeah, the Parcels and the Parcels. Going to the 1980s here in a band who I'm very, very familiar with, who have probably released 4 albums that I'm very fond of. But at the moment, this is the one that I reach for. So it's Swoon by Prefab Sprout. Steve McQueen is my favourite album by Prefab Sprout, but I think I've overplayed it. So when I want my fix of Prefab Sprout, I tend to play Swoon. So this contains Don't Sing. I can remember hearing Don't Sing for the first time. I was in a pub in Oldham called the Spotted Cow, and they had a video jukebox, and I liked the song that was playing. It was Don't Sing by Prefab Sprout. So that was sort of my introduction. Cruel's a great song. Green Isaac, Never Play Basketball, Couldn't Bear to Be Special, Technique. If you're someone who's not overly familiar with Prefab Sprout, I don't think you'd be disappointed if you gave this a listen. Swoon, Prefab Sprout. I want to show this album, a bit more love for Australia. Tame Impala and The Slow Rush from 2020. So this album, I can remember doing my ranking of albums in 2020. I think I did my top 10, and this wasn't in there because it really was a slow burner for me. It took me like a year to really sort of appreciate it. And the theme on here, the first track is One More Year. And the theme on here is sort of time's moving too quickly, you know, and I can appreciate that. You know, when you're old like me and you're thinking about albums and you think, oh, that was only a couple of years ago, and it's like 20 years ago. So, you know, time is certainly moving too quickly. And that's kind of the theme. Maybe Kevin Parker, who I showed on the insert there, seems to think time's moving too quickly. So he needs to be in my shoes. But yeah, this is an album that I listened to a lot. I streamed it a lot and then finally sort of fell in love with it. It's one of my favourite albums of the last 10 years. Slow Rush by Tame Impala. Few to go, and got to have a band from Scotland. I think I've got a couple here. And in 1987, I was very fond of Deacon Blue and this album, Raintown, the debut. So I went to see Deacon Blue, a place called the Broadwalk in Manchester, across the road from the Hacienda. And nobody really knew who Deacon Blue were. I think I've read about them. I'm not sure whether I'd actually had this album when I went to see them. This is like a concept album about working man struggling in Glasgow. And I really do like Deacon Blue's first 4 albums. There's quite a lot of singles on here that weren't big hits. Dignity was probably the most famous track. Chocolate Girl, Loaded is a great song. Born in a Storm is another great song. Just one of my favourite bands of the 80s, sort of. They weren't cool, they weren't hip, but I think they did some great albums, and this is one that I do reach for regularly. Raintown by Deacon Blue. And another Scottish band, Mogwai. So this album came out in 2020, As the Love Continues, it's called. So this is mainly instrumental. I think there's only vocals on one track. Dry Fantasy, absolutely love that. Here we go forever. That's another great track. Just every time I want to sort of, you know, it's a sort of music you can just sort of totally switch off. And there's something about Mogwai. They've released a lot of albums, done sort of a lot of maybe soundtracks and TV scores. But they came back with this in 2020, actually reached #1. Dropped out the charts pretty quickly, but I'm still playing it, still love it. So Mogwai, and as the love continues, 2020. And finally, I wanted to show a bit of a compilation. So the Stone Roses, the best of the Stone Roses. So obviously I do love the debut, the second album, Second Coming's decent. But if I want a fix of the Stone Roses, this is what I'm going to listen to. Because it's got 6 tracks from the debut, 4 from Second Coming. But then it's got Fool's Gold on it, What the World's Waiting For, Love Spreads, One Love, Sally Cinnamon. So if you want a fix of the Stone Roses, this is where you need to go. So it is an album that I do tend to play quite a lot, and I wanted to show this one. So those are the 10 albums that I reached for. I thought it was a really interesting question that Chris put out there. He didn't actually start it as a thread, just did it as a video. But the best threads are videos that people just sort of think, that's a good idea, I think I'll have a go at that. And once Mazzy jumped in, then it sort of took a life of its own. So I hope you enjoy my choices. If you've got any comments about what show, I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.